Zelda's run on the Nintendo Switch has been pretty successful. In the 7-year life cycle of Nintendo's most recent console, we've gotten 2 transformative genre-redefining games in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, a remake of a beloved 2D Zelda adventure in Link's Awakening, a remaster of one of the more divisive titles in Skyward Sword. Oh, and Hyrule Warriors is a thing that also exists. I don't think it's a stretch to say that Zelda's run on the Switch could probably rival not only any of its lineups from any previous console generation, but the lineups of any series of games on any previous console generation prior. This was the generation that made me a Zelda fan. Prior to Breath of the Wild, I had always admired Zelda from a distance. For the majority of my life, Zelda releases had come and gone, passing me by one generation after the next. But the Switch changed all that, and Breath made me feel like a part of the series for the first time in my life. Since its release, I have gone back and played at least one Zelda game every year for the past 7 years, finally scratching such legendary titles like Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, and Minish Cap off my backlog. While I still have a lot of games left to play, for the first time in my life, I felt like I could call myself a Zelda fan. We're coming to the end of the Switch's lifespan. Rumors and leaks were finally confirmed by Nintendo about the much-anticipated Switch successor, and with an imminent Nintendo Direct set to give us more information, we're ready to turn the page on one of Nintendo's most successful consoles. Zelda played a pivotal role in the success of the Switch, with Breath of the Wild selling over 30 million units and Tears of the Kingdom surpassing 20 million units by March of last year. Both titles rank within the top 10 selling games on the console. This is a list that includes some of Nintendo's most stalwart IPs, like Mario Odyssey, Smash Ultimate, Animal Crossing, Pokemon, and the behemoth that is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are both considered monumental titles that shifted the entire industry of video games forward. Nintendo could have just sailed off into the next generation, content with the performance and impact of one of its most popular properties. Tears of the Kingdom could have been the series' swan song on the Nintendo Switch, and I don't think anyone would have taken any issue with that. But Nintendo and the Zelda team had one last surprise in store. To the shock and surprise of many, The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom debuted on June 18, 2024, and was released on September 26, 2024, a mere 3 months later. It was a game in the style of the Link's Awakening remake that came out a few years prior, but that wasn't the most surprising part. For some reason, this Zelda title, at the sunset of the Switch's lifecycle, would be the game to finally star its namesake, as Princess Zelda would be the main character. The Legend of Zelda has given us many surprises the past 7 years, but Nintendo saved one of the biggest for last, allowing the player to finally play as Zelda after almost 40 years. Unless these words age extremely poorly, this appears to be the game that is set to send Zelda off into the future. It's an interesting choice. After all that the series has accomplished during this generation, this is the game that will have the final say for Zelda on this console. So what does it have to say? And how will it convey those things to us? Will it embrace the future of the series as Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have laid out for us? Will it reminisce on the past as the Link's Awakening remake and Skyward Sword have done? Or will it be a bit of both? A culmination of everything that we have experienced during this generation? As with most things, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. Echoes of Wisdom takes no time getting us into the action and starts off with a pretty spectacular opening. It isn't Zelda that we start off playing as, but rather Link. We control the cloaked swordsman at full power, a Link with full hearts and his entire complement of abilities. He navigates some kind of dark fortress or labyrinth, filled with purpose and determination as he easily clears rooms of enemies to advance forward. After a few minutes of clearing rooms and making our way through linear hallways, we arrive at the end, where we see that the fearsome Ganon has captured Princess Zelda, trapping her in a pink crystal gem, and it is here that we get the first of Echoes of Wisdom's many subversions. Within 5 minutes of playing, we already have a fight against Ganon, the pig-like monstrosity that usually serves as a final boss in many Zelda games. A final boss showdown with a Link that is already fully powered is a signal. This isn't going to be your average 2D Zelda experience. Link defeats Ganon, and as he disappears in a dark cloud, his spear sticks in the ground. Link steps forward to rescue Zelda, but unbeknownst to Link, a dark rift has suddenly appeared, swallowing Ganon's spear and beginning to expand. The floor beneath Link's feet disappears as he slowly sinks into the rift, having only a moment to fire an arrow that cracks Zelda's crystal prison, allowing her to escape. A small orb of light lands on Link's discarded cloak, causing Zelda to pick it up before the dark rift begins to expand at an alarming pace. Zelda, led by the light, flees the rift and manages to escape to the outside, where the rift's expansion is halted. Link is gone. Ganon is gone. And as Zelda walks over to a plateau overlooking the kingdom of Hyrule, we get our title shot, The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom. 2 Hyrule soldiers discover Zelda on the edge of the plateau and escort her back to Hyrule Castle, and this is where we start to discover the main plot of the story. The rift that Zelda just escaped from wasn't localized. They are appearing all over Hyrule, even in the castle town, swallowing people and structures alike. And they are spreading. During a conversation with the King of Hyrule, General Wright, and Minister Lefty, a rift appears right in the throne room, engulfing a portion of the castle as well as the 3 leaders. But surprisingly, they re-emerge, eyes glowing red, a twisted, evil incarnation of their former selves. The false King of Hyrule declares Zelda the source of the rifts and has the guards seize her, tossing her in the castle dungeons. It is here that Zelda's journey truly begins. In the darkness of her cell, the light that she had followed out of the ruins comes to her and introduces itself as Tri, an entity whose job it is to close the rifts that open all over Hyrule. Tri gives Zelda the Tri Rod and introduces us to the core mechanic of the game, Echoes. With the Tri Rod, Zelda is able to scan objects and recreate them as echoes, copies of whatever inanimate objects or creatures that were scanned. Using echoes of furniture such as tables, beds, and even plants, Zelda is able to escape the dungeon, with some timely help from Impa, just as the entire castle and surrounding town is completely engulfed by the rift spreading from its center. Echoes are Zelda's main mechanic. With the help of Tri and the Tri Rod, Zelda can scan and create echoes of a vast number of inanimate objects, elements, and enemies to help her throughout her journey. This was the mechanic that was shown in the trailers, the mechanic that was meant to distinguish Zelda from Link. As the holder of the Triforce of Wisdom, this element lends itself to Zelda's character. She isn't able to wield a sword and shield like the holder of the Triforce of Courage, so she relies on echoes for combat and puzzle solving. While the setting and presentation might seem like a familiar 2D Zelda adventure, this sets it apart from everything that has come before. The traditional Zelda formula for 2D and 3D entries has been a mix of exploration, combat, and puzzle solving in dungeons. Usually these dungeons would net you new items to add to an ever-growing arsenal of tools you would use to not only solve the rest of the puzzles in the dungeon, but to unlock an ever-growing amount of puzzles and secrets that are located in the connected overworld. A lot can be said about what Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom did to subvert the traditional Zelda formula, but the main component, in my opinion, is that these games give you all of the core tools you'll need to solve puzzles and explore the world pretty much right away, placing an emphasis on the journey and the discovery, as well as granting you access to the entire world pretty much right away. Echoes, in my opinion, are this game's attempt to inject some of that freedom of puzzle solving and exploration into a traditional 2D Zelda experience. You used to find the most useful items in dungeons. The more dungeons you explore, the more items you have to interact with the world, and these items are key to progressing in the story and in your exploration. Echoes of Wisdom still has a lot of the features of a traditional Zelda experience. You have an explorable overworld littered with hidden secrets, alongside several dungeons that require thinking and puzzle solving in order to beat them. The difference is that discovery of the keys and tools to solve these puzzles isn't strictly limited to dungeons or story moments themselves. Zelda has access to an extensive and expansive list of echoes which she can discover. So while the puzzles and challenges may seem familiar, the way in which you have the ability to solve them is different, considering you're given a growing list of tools throughout the entire game to encourage experimentation. This is pretty neat when you consider Zelda's role as the representative of the Triforce of Wisdom. Where Zelda may lack in the area of martial prowess, unless she's Sheik that is, she more than makes up for it in her cunning, intelligence, and insight. So this mechanic makes sense for our first time playing as her in a major Zelda game. Her first instinct would be to rely on her wisdom rather than brute force like Link. That is where her strengths lie. She can stack furniture to access out-of-reach areas, call on enemy echoes to fight her battles for her, use rocks and boulders as weights, and much more. When I say the list of echoes at your disposal is extensive, it's extensive almost to the point of exhaustion. By the end of my playthrough, I didn't even bother scrolling through the massive list of echoes that I had accumulated. It took too long, and by then I had already grown attached to some of my favorites that I found I could solve almost any problem I would encounter. While I think the Echo system is a fantastic way to shake up the Zelda formula without completely abandoning the structure of a traditional Zelda experience, I found that I was never truly challenged by any of the puzzles I came across. Thinking back to my playthrough of the Link's Awakening remake, I found navigating that world and its challenges much more complicated. It felt more restrictive in a good way. You had a limited number of tools that you could use to interact with the world, and the world structure felt truly labyrinthine. Because of the large number of options at your disposal with the ecosystem, the world feels more open, with most traversal roadblocks consisting of not being able to reach a certain height or elevation. In this way, it feels like the elements that made exploring Breath of the Wild's world so exciting. But because you are given so many tools and solutions to puzzles right off the bat, like in Breath of the Wild, the puzzles do seem simpler. I can't argue with some of the simplistic design of these shrines in Breath. Some of them are incredibly easy to solve and don't inspire much excitement. And while Echoes of Wisdom doesn't give you every tool you need to succeed right off the bat, by the time you get to a puzzle or a roadblock, you usually have some combination of echoes to overcome it. Having to design a puzzle with a solution that has many keys invites simplification. And while I don't think that is a bad thing, I never felt as satisfied overcoming a puzzle as I had in Zelda games in the past, especially when a lot of the puzzles I felt came down to figuring out how to get to higher elevations to progress. By the midpoint in the game, I had already found a dominant strategy that I at least tried every time I came across a roadblock: stacking beds. Bed echoes are incredibly useful. They can be stacked on top of each other to create a makeshift staircase, and it's amazing how many roadblocks could be circumvented with this simple strategy. At first, this isn't a perfect solution. The number of echoes you can summon early in the game is limited until Tri levels up. But once you have the ability to summon more echoes, a towering bed staircase will reach most places that you are unable to access. Roadblocks are trivialized even more when you have access to water block echoes. These cubes of water can be stacked on top of one another, meaning you can use them to swim up to any ledge that is out of reach. Between beds and water blocks, height roadblocks were no issue, and combined with a few other echoes, I had all the tools I needed to overcome any obstacle. Now, this does allow you some freedom in how you want to approach the final dungeons of the game, and I think being able to tackle any of these in any order is important to make you feel that sense of discovery present in the Switch 3D Zelda games. If it felt like you were being railroaded, then the game would have felt more like a tour rather than a genuine adventure. The ecosystem lands this game somewhere in the middle of the Zelda spectrum. Not quite as challenging and restrictive as some of the traditional Zelda games, but not quite as free and approachable as Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. It's a shame because there are some fascinating echoes in this game, like wind cannons, floating tiles, moving statues, elements that could make for some really interesting and intuitive puzzle designs. While I did make use of these elements occasionally, I felt that puzzles that required the use of more interesting echoes were few and far between. My simple brain always went to stacking beds. And while I'm sure a lot of puzzles could be solved in more interesting ways, I'm not smart. So beds and water blocks did just fine in most cases. I would argue that given the number of tools at your disposal and that some echoes are missable, designing puzzles around super specific echoes would be bad if players missed an echo needed to progress. So props to the Zelda team for accounting for tons of possibilities and crafting challenges that wouldn't soft lock you if you happen to run by an important echo. Even if I might find the puzzles underwhelming, it's better game design to ensure something can be solved regardless of what echoes you have. That's just good game design. There's one more mechanic Zelda has access to in her arsenal, one that feels a bit more familiar to Zelda traditionalists. Throughout her adventures, Zelda can stumble across Link's gear, his sword, his bow, and his bombs. You find the sword first, which is referred to as the Sword of Might and not the Master Sword, and this gives you access to Sword Fighter form. There's a meter underneath Zelda's hearts, and by pressing a button on the D-pad, she can enter Sword Fighter form as long as there's charge in the meter. This allows Zelda to dispatch enemies in the more traditional way, using sword and shield to defeat enemies rather than relying solely on echoes. When you find the bow and bombs respectively, you'll be able to use these weapons as well in Sword Fighter mode. I think this is an interesting choice, and it was probably something that was included by the Zelda team purposefully. I'll admit, when I first saw the gameplay for Echoes of Wisdom, I thought it looked great, but one of my main concerns was combat. I thought it was a novel idea to have Zelda use her accumulated echoes to fight in combat on her behalf, but I tended to enjoy combat in Zelda games. So I was kind of disappointed that I wouldn't have these standard combat options present. Now that I've actually played the game, I have the exact opposite thought. I'm sure this inclusion was made to address exactly the types of thoughts I was having, that stripping out traditional combat in a Zelda game was going just a bit too far. The whole point of having Zelda as the playable character was that her gameplay would be distinct from Link's, and while Sword Fighter mode has a limited amount of time it can be used, the meter can easily be filled up by defeating enemies or making stat buffing smoothies that restore energy. You can also upgrade the meter to hold more energy, meaning by the end of the game, you can stay in this form for a decent amount of time. I get that having Zelda summon echoes and watching them fight enemies in the overworld maybe isn't everyone's idea of a good time, but Sword Fighter mode can be used to brute force boss and combat challenges that maybe would have taken a little longer if you were only relying on echoes. It ends up feeling a bit like a half step, a compromise made by the dev team who are hesitant to fully take away such a vital aspect of the game's identity. There are some puzzle-solving elements that require Sword Fighter mode to solve, but there aren't a lot of these compared to puzzles that can be solved with echoes. I understand the decision to include it. Giving the player more choice is always a good thing, and my opinion isn't reflective of the whole game. It's just something I thought about as I was playing, and it's not like Sword Fighter mode ruined my experience. I know that I had some critiques in this section. These were thoughts I had during my playthrough of the game. But I think overall, for Zelda's first outing in her own series, there's a lot to love here. She has access to a wide array of different echoes to overcome challenges, and has the added power of Sword Fighter mode to fall back on if you encounter something that is really giving you a hard time. There's still a sense of wonder exploring Hyrule as its princess, and I felt that it was a more serene, peaceful experience than some of the other Zelda games I've played recently. From what I've seen, most people have responded positively to Zelda finally getting her own game, and I hope it's a strong enough reception that she will get more of those games in the future. The world of Echoes of Wisdom has a foundation of familiarity to any longtime Zelda veterans. If you take the map of Echoes and the map of Link to the Past and overlay them, you'll see that they are similar in many ways. Hyrule Castle sits at the center of the map, serving as a central hub that connects all the different regions. Hyrule Fields dominate the center and west regions, separating the more diverse biomes that you'll be exploring. Lake Hylia is also located here, the dominant water fixture present in so many Zelda adventures. To the southwest, you have the Gerudo Desert. The Faron Wetlands are to the southeast, the Jabul Waters to the west and northwest, an Elven Volcano to the northeast, as well as the mountains of Hebra to the north with a dense forest just next door. It isn't a one-to-one recreation of Link to the Past's Hyrule, but the resemblance is striking. Anyone that has played both A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds will feel right at home with these similarities. As someone who doesn't have extensive knowledge of these older games, this world still felt new and exciting, even though at a subconscious level, there was familiarity. I don't think there's anything wrong with this approach. If anything, the added comfortability was welcomed in an uncertain adventure where Zelda was the main character. This was clearly a choice made to add some similarity to other Zeldas, just like Sword Fighter form, to balance out some of the newer elements. And in this aspect, it succeeds. Echo's Hyrule is what you would expect. It's littered with caves, little puzzles, and secrets to explore, rewarding you with heart pieces, new echoes, or ingredients for smoothies. This is an important element between the more complex dungeons to keep exploration fresh and exciting. It feels great to use an echo to access a heart piece just out of reach, cross a chasm to get a treasure chest, or spelunk through a cave you happen to stumble across. Yes, I do think some of these can be solved a little too easily, as I mentioned earlier, but there's still a thrill of walking into a hidden room or cave, looking around to process the information, and then using echoes to try and overcome the roadblock in front of you. This is further enhanced by the abundance of 2D sections, which are side-scrolling gameplay opportunities that are used to break up the open-world exploration, as well as connect different parts on the map or in dungeons. 2D portions present their own challenges, taking away the open-world medium and restricting you to more linear sections. Puzzles in these 2D caves or hallways require a slight change of thinking to solve, as would be expected based on these restrictions. Since this game is made in the style of the Link's Awakening remake, it makes sense that these 2D portions would return. Speaking of the Link's Awakening remake, I still found that world was more complicated to explore. Because that game gradually gives you more and more tools to interact with the world, traversal to certain areas is more challenging until you have the keys to overcome those traversal challenges. The world gradually unfolds as you acquire more items and are able to interact with it more. By comparison, the Hyrule of Echoes of Wisdom feels much more open. It's less restrictive, as I would expect from a brand new 2D Zelda game following Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. That spirit of go anywhere, do anything is present in this game, as my ever-growing arsenal of echoes allowed me to pretty much explore any part of the map at any time I wanted. There is a built-in system that discourages this, however. Certain parts of the map have stronger enemies that are able to take out your echoes and your health much faster. It's clear that these sections are made more difficult to kind of follow along with the story progression. You're prompted to go there once you have advanced the plot, and usually by that time you have more hearts, more powerful echoes, and a more powerful sword fighter form. But that is the only thing discouraging you from unchained exploration. If you want to go to those areas, you can. You'll just have a bit tougher of a time. Also, speaking of breath and tears, Echoes doesn't just leave you to wander to your own devices. Main quest and side quest markers are clearly visible on your map, giving you at least some guardrails when you are ready to stop wandering and advance the plot of the game. There are sections of the map that you can wander into that serve purposes to the story, and until you reach that point, you won't be able to interact with them. Hyrule isn't the only place you'll be going, however. If you remember from the introduction to the game, rifts are appearing across the land, swallowing up large chunks of land and their inhabitants. These rifts are explorable, similar to how the Dark World is explorable in A Link to the Past. Your fairy companion Tri is able to open portals into these rifts, as it's their job to cleanse them. These rifts are actually called the Still World, realms where time has stopped and the landscape is warped and twisted beyond recognition. Landscapes that once had trees are now flipped on their sides, and these same trees now serve as ledges rather than roadblocks. Stranded islands of land float loosely connected amongst the dark backdrop of the Still World, and it seems to be an attempt to do the alternate Hyrule thing, sort of like the Dark World in Link to the Past, and a few other games in the series. But this implementation feels more temporary, and once these rifts are restored, the main world is restored as well. This is where the game's dungeons are located, but there are smaller rifts scattered across the landscape of Hyrule that require you to find a set number of Tri's friends so that they can purge the rift and return the landscape to the real world. The warped terrain of these locations requires some different thinking for traversal, but nothing that goes too far outside the bounds of the box. Sure, horizontal traversal might now be vertical, and there might be a bit more platforming taking place between floating landmasses, but again, when you have some of the more powerful echoes at your disposal, this negates these challenges entirely. Any verticality can be overcome by stacking water blocks or some quick cloud echo usage combined with jumping. The most interesting use of this still world mechanic is when it is intertwined with dungeon exploration. Seeing that Echo's dungeons are located in the still world themselves, there are a few of them that have outside exits, causing weaving exploration by exiting the dungeon at one point in the still world and re-entering at another. This type of linked exploration is exciting, but too few of the dungeons do this, opting for more traditional layouts, which is fine. But similar to my thoughts on the Link's Awakening remake, I feel like I had a much easier time with a lot of the dungeons in this game. Don't get me wrong, I had a fun time exploring Echo's dungeons, but there were maybe 1 or 2 times I can recall where I truly got stuck and had to rack my brain and analyze the dungeon map to figure out what the next move could be. I think a big reason for this can once again be boiled down to design. Dungeons in a traditional Zelda game have been heavily designed around the item you find in said dungeon. Usually the first part of the dungeon is progressing through it to find that item in order to access the second half. That design philosophy changes with Echoes as the main mechanic as you constantly collect more and more of them over the course of the game. You have a constant supply of potential keys to solve puzzles, and while not every puzzle in a dungeon can be overcome by any old Echo, there are many puzzles that can be solved with Echoes you already have. You sacrifice the rigid dungeon design in other 3D Zelda games when they are built around specific items with the introduction of Echoes, and I think this has the effect of simplifying them a bit. There was clearly an effort to try and capture some of the on-the-fly experimental shrine puzzle solving from the 3D Switch games, and while that works sometimes, I think it makes for less challenging dungeons overall. Again, this is not a negative critique, just something I noticed in my analysis of my playthrough, and I couldn't help but point out the differences. Considering this is Zelda's first starring role in her own series, it would have been incredibly easy to feature Ganon/Ganondorf as the primary antagonist. It would make a lot of sense considering how Ganon is linked across all the other games with both Link and Zelda. That would have injected some familiarity into a title that some felt unsure about, and I wouldn't have blamed them for doing so. I fought Bowser countless times across dozens of Mario games, and he, most of the time, finds a way to delight and surprise. So I certainly wouldn't have been opposed to fighting Ganon once again. But the Zelda team opted to go in a different direction, and this was abundantly clear when you not only defeat Ganon within the first moments of the game, but witness him being swallowed by the relentless advance of a rift. Null is an entity that existed in the void of nothingness before the creation of the world. Anytime some semblance of order or balance would appear within the void, Null would act swiftly to destroy that intrusion. The goddesses of Hyrule intervened, creating the sky and the world and trapping Null beneath its surface. Null fought against his imprisonment, creating rifts that spread across the land to try and return the world to the void. To combat this threat, the goddesses responded by creating the Tris, whose job it is to fix the rifts that Null creates. This is what happens in the beginning of the game, after Link defeats Ganon and rescues Zelda. They both get swallowed by a rift, leaving Zelda to undertake the task of healing the land of this blight alone. Null's goal? To access the prime energies left behind by the goddesses to return the world to emptiness. It begins capturing the Tris and flooding the world of Hyrule with echoes of monsters and nightmares. Ganon may be an imposing force, but I like giving Zelda her own villain to contend with that is a literal threat to the fabric of reality. It's a fitting challenge for someone who wields the Triforce of Wisdom, a threat that extends beyond the scope of courage and power. What's even cooler is the way that Null also utilizes the captured Tri's abilities to create echoes, and it does this all over the game as many of the enemies you contend with are echoes of their original selves. While echoes is an ability given to Zelda, it's very cool to see the main antagonist of her game use the same tools she has at her disposal to try and stop her at every turn. And this extends beyond just the enemies you fight. Early in the game, when Hyrule Castle is swallowed by a rift, the echoes of the king, the minister, and General Wright are created in their place, turning the entire kingdom of Hyrule against its princess and branding her a fugitive. It's a cunning move by Null, utilizing Zelda's own abilities against her, and considering that Zelda isn't a physical fighter, she must rely on her wisdom to outsmart an opponent who can not only do the same things as her, but is also a literal primordial force of nature. This fully manifests itself in the final showdown with Null, who manages to create an echo of Zelda, taking the power of the prime energies for itself. Apart from that, all the familiar Zelda story elements you know and love are present. We've got the land of Hyrule, dungeons to explore, lore about the goddesses, and the Triforce. All the different peoples of Hyrule we know and love are there as well, including Hylians, the River and Sea Zora, the Gerudo, and the Gorons. So even though the narrative might differ slightly with Zelda being the star, the setting feels familiar and is there to reinforce to us that yes, this is still Zelda. So while there are familiar elements to this Zelda story, it is truly unique amongst its fellow games and ends up being a unique story all its own. And for Zelda's first starring role in her own series, you couldn't ask for more. So where do we go from here? There seems to be a lot of speculation as to what the future holds, not only for the Switch successor, but the direction of Zelda as a whole. With the massive success of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, it seems that Nintendo has struck gold by abandoning some of the core tenets that have guided Zelda for so long. It was a risk to be sure, but it paid off big time to the tune of massive critical and commercial success. The lessons from these two games have taught Nintendo much, and there is no world where they abandon what they've learned. The less restrictive approach of 3D Zelda appears to be sticking around, and not everyone is happy about this. For as much praise as Breath and Tears have garnered over the years, there have been voices in the video game community that express a desire to return to the tried and true formula of past 3D Zelda games. For as much celebration as there have been for the risks and decisions Nintendo has taken with Zelda this generation, there's also been criticism that the games millions of people grew up loving were now being left behind. And I understand this sentiment. Traditional 3D Zelda games are beloved, critically revered, and commercially successful. While this generation isn't devoid of traditional Zelda experiences, they certainly haven't performed as well as the two flagship Zelda titles. The Link's Awakening remake, while brilliant, only sold 6 million copies. Skyward Sword HD has sold about 4 million units as of this recording, and Echoes of Wisdom, since its release on September 26th, has surpassed about 2.5 million units. This is by no means disappointing considering Nintendo does better than most managing their budgets and resources when it comes to game development, but these sales combined don't even approach what Tears of the Kingdom has done so far. I don't think this matters as much as you would think, however. As stated above, Tears of the Kingdom could have been the perfect send-off, the culmination of Nintendo's philosophy on Zelda during the Switch era. But they didn't do this. They decided that Echoes of Wisdom would be the final word on Zelda for this generation. And I think this is an important message that maybe we've been thinking about the future direction of Zelda all wrong. Boiling the argument down to Zelda can only exist as it has or as it currently is feels kind of reductive, like we have two choices and can only pick one, like we can only take Zelda in one of two directions. Echoes of Wisdom is the answer to this discourse. A lot of Echoes is rooted in traditional Zelda, with some creative and freedom elements borrowed from Breath and Tears sprinkled in. The result isn't a game that fits into either category comfortably, but establishes a category somewhere in the middle of these two philosophies. A center point now creates something of a spectrum, a sliding scale that allows for more flexibility amongst all the characteristics that now define Zelda. I know I spent the better part of this video oscillating between things that I enjoyed and things that I feel are genuine criticisms of the game, but deep down, I truly enjoyed my time with Echoes of Wisdom. It was a refreshing take on a traditional Zelda experience that I didn't know I was looking for at the time. I was convinced that Tears of the Kingdom would be the last we saw of Zelda on the Nintendo Switch, and that we would sail off into the next generation, ready for a new way of thinking about Zelda. We've been primed for new Zelda experiences, but I think Nintendo choosing to end this era of Zelda with Echoes of Wisdom sends a clear message. The future does not consist of only Breath of the Wild. The past will not be forgotten. Zelda can exist beyond the bounds of tradition or within it. A world in which Zelda can exist in various forms is very much one I want to live in. And it took the princess herself to lead us into an era where all types of Zelda games are on the table. And I can't wait to see what the future has in store. Thank you everybody so much for listening, and thank you especially to all the patrons who support the show with their hard-earned money. It means a lot to me that you decide to go the extra mile and support the show a little bit more. If you'd like to hear more from the Unlockables, check out linktr.ee/unlockablespodcast. You can find the podcast links there. It is on all the popular podcast platforms, and you can find all the links to our social media, to TikTok, to YouTube, to Instagram, all that fun stuff. And check out the link for the Discord server. Jump in the Discord server and have some awesome conversations about video games with a lot of other really great creators and people who talk about games on the internet. That's all for this episode of the Unlockables. I will see you guys on the next video.